Episode 1, The Night the Churchyard Shifted. My name is Father Elias Ward, and I was sent to St. Harrow's Hollow because no one else would come. The parish had been abandoned for almost 30 years, its church left to rot among the fog and the crows. They said it was cursed. They said the ground moved when no one watched. The first night I arrived, the air itself felt awake. The trees bowed as if in silent prayer, and the wind carried the faint toll of a bell that should have been broken. The villagers who guided me refused to cross the gate. One of them pressed a crucifix into my palm and whispered, "The graves don't stay where you bury them." Inside the church, the smell of mold and incense mixed into something that clung to my skin. The pews were warped, the altar cracked. Yet the old stone walls hummed almost like breathing. I unpacked my Bible, lit a single candle, and told myself I would bring light back to this forgotten place. At midnight, the candle died without a breeze. I heard something sliding outside. Not footsteps, more like soil being dragged. I took my lantern and stepped into the fog-soaked yard. That's when I saw it. Rows of graves misaligned, tilted as if the earth had shifted beneath them. I could swear the nearest tombstone was facing the wrong way. My heart pounded as I moved closer. The name on it was Amelia Crow, 1892 to 1911. I turned to look at another grave behind me and froze. The same name. Same date. But the stone was cracked, as if it had been pulled out of the ground and replanted. And then the bell rang. 1 toll. 2. 3. I ran inside to the tower, but the rope was torn, frayed, and covered in dust. Someone was wringing it without a hand. From the window I watched the earth tremble. Tombstones rotated like compass needles finding north. The soil swelled and sank, graves shifting inches at a time. It looked like the entire churchyard was breathing in unison, exhaling the dead. A whisper rose from beneath the ground. Hundreds of voices tangled together, muttering prayers I could barely recognize. Latin. Old English. Some in tones no human throat could form. I dropped to my knees, reciting Psalm 23, but the words faltered as a shape emerged from the mist, a silhouette standing between the graves. At first I thought it was a mourner. Then it turned toward me. Its face was a blur of movement, as if time refused to hold it still. And from where its feet should have touched the soil, roots spread outward, black and pulsing, crawling toward me. I fled into the church and slammed the doors. The bell stopped. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. When dawn broke, I dared to look outside. The graves were perfectly aligned again, each one freshly covered, as though nothing had happened. Except for one detail. My name had been carved onto a new headstone near the gate. And beneath it, freshly cut into the marble, was tomorrow's date. Episode 2, The Widow and the Whispering Soil. I barely slept after that first night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the bell again, soft, distant, like a heartbeat in the fog. But when morning came, I convinced myself it had been exhaustion, imagination twisted by fear. Faith must not bow to shadows, I told myself. That was before the widow came. Her name was Margaret Holloway, one of the few remaining villagers who still dared to speak to me. She wore black from head to toe, her veil tattered but clean, and her eyes, God forgive me, looked as though they had not seen rest in years. She came to the rectory door clutching a photograph, trembling. "Father," she said, "my husband's grave has moved." I thought she meant someone had tampered with it, vandals or grave robbers. But when I followed her to the churchyard, my breath caught. She pointed to a spot near the yew tree, the ground freshly turned. "He was buried there," she said, "right beside the path. Now his stone is gone." I searched the rows, trying to reassure her, but she was right. The grave had shifted several feet to the left, as if the earth had swallowed it and spat it out again. The stone leaned against a new mound, engraved with her husband's name, Thomas Holloway, 1938 to 1979. And beneath the name, a line that chilled my spine, moved by grace. I knelt down, touched the soil, and felt something beneath, a vibration, faint but steady, like a pulse. I drew my hand back immediately. Margaret stared at me, her lips trembling. "Last night," she whispered, "I heard him calling from under the window. He said he couldn't breathe down there." The wind rose suddenly, carrying a sound I'll never forget, a soft murmuring, like 1,000 breaths passing through the grass. The soil itself began to whisper. Words too faint to catch, but I swear I heard my name woven among them. "Father Elias." I grabbed Margaret's arm and pulled her toward the church, but she wouldn't move. She fell to her knees, crying, pressing her ear against the ground. Her eyes widened. "He's praying," she said. "He's saying the rosary." I tried to lift her, but something in the earth moved. The soil beneath her hand rippled like water, and a pale fingertip broke through, twitching, grasping for air. I dragged her away screaming, back inside the church. By the time I dared look again, the ground was still. Only her handkerchief lay upon it, half buried in the dirt. That night, the bell rang again. 3 slow tolls. When I looked out from the tower, I saw Margaret standing in the churchyard, her black veil floating like smoke. She was digging with her bare hands, whispering prayers into the soil. I shouted her name, but she didn't look up. When dawn came, her grave appeared beside her husband's 2 stones, now, side by side, both freshly carved. Hers read, "Margaret Holloway, reunited by grace." I hadn't buried her. No one had. And yet, the soil around her grave was still warm to the touch. Episode 3, The Confession in Reverse. They say silence is the language of God. But in St. Harrow's Hollow, even silence had a voice. 3 nights after Margaret Holloway's burial, I began hearing whispers again, but not from the soil this time. They came from inside the confessional booth. The church was empty, locked, and yet each dusk, when I entered to pray, the faint sound of breathing echoed from behind the curtain. Slow, ragged, patient. I told myself it was the wind, until one evening I found the booth door slightly open, a thin streak of candle wax dripping down its frame. Someone had lit a candle inside, though no matches had been used in weeks. And on the bench, I found a tape recorder, the kind used decades ago for sermons. Its red light blinked weakly, waiting. I pressed play. The voice that emerged was not human in rhythm. It spoke in wet, broken syllables, words reversed, like a prayer played backward. At first, all I heard were sounds, meaningless and distorted. But as I turned the volume up, I caught fragments. Mercy, forgive, absolve me. And beneath those words, another voice murmured, a second, colder tone, whispering something in Latin. I stopped the tape, trembling, and reversed it manually, spinning the reels with my fingers. When I played it backward, the confession became clear. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I buried them beneath the altar, where the light cannot reach. The soil knows my name. Bishop Alaric. That name meant nothing to me then. But when I searched the church's archives that night, I found it Bishop Alaric de Montfort, the man who consecrated St. Harrow's in 1887. He had been excommunicated for heresy and declared dead soon after. His burial site? Unrecorded. The next night, I returned to the booth with my own recorder. I placed it on the bench, whispered a prayer, and left it running while I slept. When I played it back the following morning, I heard my own breathing. Then, faintly, a second one. Then, the sound of footsteps. The booth door creaked open. A man's voice, calm and cold, spoke directly into the microphone. You listened, Father Ward. Now it is your turn to confess. The sound of the recorder slamming shut made me flinch. But what froze my blood was the final noise, scraping, like something heavy being dragged across stone. I ran to the booth. The air inside was icy, and a smell like damp ash filled my lungs. The wooden wall behind the seat had split open slightly, revealing a hollow cavity. I reached in and felt parchment brittle, rolled tight, sealed with crimson wax. It bore the sigil of Bishop Alaric. Inside, a single sentence written in fading ink. I have moved their graves so they may walk again. The church bell rang once as I read those words. From the confessional floor, a faint vibration rose through the wood like something stirring beneath it, eager to speak. That night, I burned the tape. But the voice did not stop. When I lay in bed, I heard it whispering from inside my pillow, reciting the Lord's Prayer, in reverse. Episode 4, A Tomb That Bleeds. The more I prayed, the louder the ground seemed to answer. By the fourth week, the church no longer felt like a house of God, it felt like something alive, something waiting. It began after the rain. For 3 nights it fell without pause, turning the churchyard into a mire of gray and crimson mud. When I went outside to check the graves, I saw a dark trail winding through the puddles, a thin stream of red, weaving between the stones like a serpent. At first, I thought it was paint, maybe run off from rusted iron. But as I knelt and dipped my fingers into it, the metallic scent struck me. Blood. Warm. Fresh. It flowed from a grave near the edge of the yard, one with no name, no flowers, just a single crooked cross stabbed into the soil. I had walked past it countless times but never noticed how the ground there was always slightly sunken, as if whatever rested below was still breathing. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Around midnight, I went back with a lantern. The rain had stopped, but the air shimmered with mist. As I approached, I saw that the soil was pulsing, faintly rising and falling like a chest inhaling in sleep. The blood had thickened into dark veins across the ground. I whispered a prayer and pressed the lantern closer. The crooked cross trembled. Beneath it, I heard a sound, not a whisper this time, but something like weeping. Muffled, low, coming from under the earth. I dropped to my knees and brushed the soil away until my hands struck something hard, stone. An old lid, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The weeping grew louder, echoing through the ground, as though trapped beneath a coffin. And then, the stone cracked. A thin line split down its center, and from that line, blood began to leak, running between my fingers. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and the earth groaned an awful, shuddering sound, like lungs filling for the first time in centuries. Suddenly the church bell tolled, though no wind stirred. The graves around me shifted, their stones vibrating in sympathy. I saw names flicker and change under the moonlight, letters sliding into new words. One of them, half buried in mud, now bore my surname. I fled inside, soaked and shaking. The floor beneath the altar was damp. Blood had seeped through the cracks, spreading in delicate tendrils like roots searching for life. I ran for the sacristy, grabbed the holy water, and poured it over the red stains, chanting verses through my teeth. For a moment, the floor hissed and then it absorbed the water, swallowing it whole. Silence. Until the candles flickered, and from somewhere deep beneath the church came the faint sound of something knocking. 3 times. I looked down. The blood was gone. But on the altar, carved fresh into the wood, were 6 words. You cannot sanctify what still breathes. That night, I locked every door and window. But even as I prayed, I could still hear the rain outside, except it wasn't rain anymore. It was dripping from the ceiling. And when I touched it, it was warm. Episode 5, The Monk Without a Face. They say a church is never truly empty, that even when its pews are bare, the walls still remember every prayer ever whispered inside. But that morning, I could feel the prayers watching me. The blood from the nameless grave had vanished overnight, leaving the soil black and dry. I should have felt relief. Instead, there was a new unease in the air, a rhythm, faint but constant, like footsteps echoing in time with my pulse. At first, I thought it was imagination. Then the villagers began whispering about a hooded figure wandering the churchyard before dawn. No one dared to approach it. Some said it prayed without moving its lips, others swore it knelt before the graves that had shifted, as if giving them last rites. I stayed awake 3 nights waiting for it to appear. On the 4th, I saw it. Through the fog, between the crooked stones, a shape took form, tall, draped in tattered robes blacker than the night itself. It moved slowly, with a strange stillness, as though gliding rather than walking. When it reached the old yew tree, it knelt. Its hands, pale as candle wax, folded in prayer. I stepped outside, clutching my rosary. "Brother," I called softly, "are you lost?" The figure froze. Then, without turning, it raised its head toward the sky, a long, shuddering motion, almost reverent. When it finally turned to face me, my breath caught. It had no face. No eyes, no mouth, only a smooth expanse of flesh where a human face should have been. But that flesh moved, shifting in waves as though something beneath was trying to surface. Symbols burned faintly across it, faint Latin letters, curling like smoke, glowing red and fading again. I stumbled backward, raising the crucifix. "In nomine Patris." It spoke. No mouth, yet the words echoed clear as a bell. "You are late, Father Ward. The graves await their shepherd." The ground trembled. Behind it, tombstones began to tilt, the earth swelling like breath beneath a coffin lid. I demanded its name, its purpose, its master, but it only laughed, a hollow sound that made the lantern flame shiver. "Names are for the living," it whispered. I was the keeper of vows. The last to bless the damned before they were buried. Now they walk, and I pray for their feet. It lifted its hand toward me, palm outward. There, branded into the flesh, was the same sigil from Bishop Alaric's seal. "He built this church upon us," the faceless monk said. "Upon our bones. Upon our prayers." Then it leaned closer, until its voice filled my skull like a chorus of whispers. "You wear his sins now." The lantern burst, plunging the yard into darkness. I fell to the ground, blinded. When I opened my eyes, the monk was gone, only the yew tree remained, its bark oozing a thin line of red. I fled inside and locked the doors. But when I looked at my hands, I saw something burned into my skin, the same sigil, faint but unmistakable. And as the church bell rang at dawn, I realized the sound was not coming from above, but from beneath the floorboards. Episode 6, The Day the Bells Rang Themselves. Morning in St. Harrow's Hollow used to mean birdsong and fog. Now, it meant silence, the kind that presses against your ears until it starts to sound like breathing. After the night I saw the faceless monk, I swore I'd leave. But something in this place had already taken root inside me. When I looked at the road out of the village, my chest tightened as if the air itself forbade me to go. That day, the sun rose red. I went to the bell tower, hoping to pray above the weight of the earth, away from the whispering graves. The climb was steep, the wood groaning with every step. Cobwebs clung to my cassock, and somewhere below, the church doors creaked though no wind moved them. The bells had not been touched in decades. Their ropes hung like veins, frayed and brittle. I reached for one, testing it. It snapped in my hand. Dust rained down like ash. I remember whispering to myself, "At least this part of the church still sleeps." But I was wrong. At noon, the first bell rang. No one had pulled the rope. No mechanism had moved. It simply awoke. Its toll was so deep I felt it vibrate through my ribs, through the wood beneath my feet. Then a second bell joined it, higher, desperate, like a scream in brass. Outside, villagers began to gather, shielding their ears. Some fell to their knees, crossing themselves again and again. And then, through the pealing chaos, I heard something else: names. Each toll was speaking a name. Thomas Holloway. Margaret Holloway. Amelia Crow. The same names I had seen on the shifting graves. I ran to the edge of the tower and looked down. The churchyard was moving. Graves rippled in rhythm with each strike of the bells, as if the sound was commanding them. The earth cracked in perfect lines, straight, deliberate, spelling out symbols I had seen on the monk's skin. The final bell began to toll by itself, the great one at the center. It rang 13 times. The sound was unbearable metal screaming against heaven. And with the 13th toll, every window in the church shattered inward. When the last echo faded, silence fell so complete it hurt. I stumbled down the tower stairs, glass crunching beneath my boots. Inside the nave, dust hung like fog. Every candle had gone out. And there, sitting in the first pew, was a woman I had never seen before. Her skin was pale, her dress soaked as if she'd come from a storm. She smiled faintly and said, "You heard them too, didn't you?" I asked her who she was. She looked up at the broken bell tower and whispered, "I'm the one the bells forgot to call." Then she vanished, her form dissolving into dust that drifted toward the altar. I turned to the door, ready to flee, but the church spoke again. The bells gave a single, soft chime like a sigh. And above the door, etched by shards of falling glass, I saw new words scratched into the wood. Next toll, Elias Ward. The bell rope swayed though the air was still. And I finally understood. The bells weren't warning us of death. Episode 7, The Child Who Drew the Map of the Dead. After the day the bells rang themselves, St. Harrow's Hollow stopped pretending to be a living place. Shutters stayed closed. Smoke no longer rose from the chimneys. The villagers crossed themselves when I passed, as though I were already a ghost among them. That was when the boy appeared. He came to the rectory door at dawn, barefoot, drenched in mist, clutching a bundle of papers to his chest. He couldn't have been more than 10. His eyes were the color of whetstone, and though he never spoke a word, he handed me one of the papers and pointed toward the churchyard. It was a map. At first glance, it looked like a child's scribble, lines curling, circles scattered. But when I held it to the light, my stomach turned. Each circle bore the name of someone buried in St. Harrow's, and each line marked where the graves had moved since the bells tolled. Even more chilling, there were new circles, unmarked graves, drawn in the empty spaces between the old ones. One of those empty circles had my name written beneath it. I tried to ask where he had seen this. The boy only shook his head and began to draw again, faster, his pencil scratching with frantic precision. He never looked down, never paused. It was as if his hand were being guided. Within minutes, a new map formed, this one showing the next movements of the churchyard. When he finished, he stared past me toward the window. His lips moved soundlessly, tracing a word I couldn't hear. I followed his gaze. Outside, the fog had thickened into a wall. Beneath it, the earth shifted. A fresh mound of soil rose, exactly where he had drawn one. The map was no prophecy. It was a recording drawn from something the boy could see that I could not. I ran into the churchyard. The ground where the mound rose was still wet, as though newly dug. I dropped to my knees and brushed the soil away. Beneath it, I found a single toy, a small wooden cross carved crudely, initials scratched into it, AW. When I turned to ask the boy what it meant, he was gone. The paper he'd given me fluttered into the mud. I picked it up and froze. New lines had appeared across it, drawn in what looked like dried blood. They formed words now, written in a child's trembling hand. I draw what the dead remember. That night I searched the village for him, knocking on every door, begging for answers. No one claimed to know a boy like that. One old woman finally whispered that a mute child had died years ago in a flood, the son of a gravedigger named Abel Ward. My father's name. I returned to the rectory, shaking. The drawings lay on my desk, every page covered in shifting circles that seemed to move when I blinked. In the center of the last map, the ink had thickened into blackness. From that black spot, faint scratching began to echo. Not from the paper but from beneath the floorboards. When I pulled them open, I found the same wooden cross with the initials AW buried in the dust. And the sound of a child whispering, ever so softly, "You forgot to bless me, Father." Episode 8, The Priest's Mirror. There are moments when faith doesn't feel like light. It feels like staring into a mirror that reflects something you don't want to see. After the boy vanished, I locked the maps away. Yet every morning, they reappeared on my desk freshly drawn, as if an unseen hand had been working overnight. The last one had a circle drawn not around a grave, but around the church itself. That was when I found the mirror. It was buried behind the sacristy, hidden under rotting hymnals and torn vestments. Its frame was carved from dark oak, engraved with Latin prayers I half recognized, Ut vides veritatem, so you may see the truth. When I lifted it, dust clouded the air, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement inside its surface. Not my reflection, but something shifting behind it. I blinked. It was gone. I carried it into my quarters, wiped it clean, and hung it opposite the window so that daylight could strike it. But as soon as sunlight touched the glass, the reflection darkened. The room behind me faded from view, replaced by stone walls slick with moisture, candles burning where none stood in reality. And then I saw myself. But not as I was. The figure in the mirror wore my cassock, my cross, my trembling hands, but his face was sunken, pale, lips blackened as if by rot. His eyes were hollow sockets, and from his mouth leaked a slow trickle of earth. I stumbled back, clutching my rosary. The reflection stayed where it was, unmoving. Then its mouth opened wider, stretching impossibly, and I heard it whisper my own voice, twisted and hollow. "You bless the dead, but not yourself." The lights flickered. The air thickened with the smell of wet soil and candle smoke. I reached out to cover the mirror with a cloth, but the glass shattered. Shards scattered across the floor, each one reflecting a different version of me, one screaming, one kneeling, one smiling through blood. The largest shard trembled, and from within it, a faint heartbeat pulsed. I picked it up, and instantly, I was somewhere else. I stood inside the mirror's reflection, within a version of the church that was alive. The pews breathed, the walls wept candle wax, and the altar dripped with the same blood that had seeped through its cracks before. From behind me came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I turned. It was the faceless monk, holding a mirror identical to mine. But in his reflection, I saw Bishop Alaric kneeling before the altar, whispering prayers to a God who had long abandoned him. His voice echoed across the chamber. "If heaven will not forgive us, the earth must." The monk raised a hand and pressed it against the glass separating us. I did the same. Our palms met through the barrier, and for a moment, I felt something crawl beneath my skin, carving symbols into my flesh. When I awoke on the rectory floor, the mirror lay whole again, spotless. My reflection smiled back at me, though my own lips did not move. And in the corner of the mirror, faintly etched, were new words that hadn't been there before. Heaven has forgotten its reflection. Episode 9, The Procession That Never Ends. They say the dead march only once from the grave to eternity. But in St. Harrow's Hollow, the dead walk in circles. It began on a night so quiet I could hear my heartbeat echo against the rafters. The air inside the church felt charged, like the pause before thunder. I'd been kneeling at the altar for hours, trying to pray, but my words kept slipping away, replaced by memories that weren't mine, men chanting, candles burning, the scent of oil and ash. When the first footstep sounded behind me, I thought it was the wind. Then another. Then dozens. I turned. The church doors were open, though I hadn't heard them move. and through the fog outside came a procession, a line of priests in black cassocks, their hands folded, faces bowed, moving in perfect silence. They filed down the aisle 2 by 2, the sound of their shoes soft and rhythmic, like rain falling in reverse. Their robes brushed against the pews, leaving trails of soot. As they passed, the candles on either side of the nave flared to life on their own, one after another, until the church glowed gold and red. I rose to greet them, to ask what they were doing here, but none looked at me. None even blinked. I realized, with growing dread, that every one of their faces was identical, featureless, like wax effigies molded in the same form. Then I saw the one at the front. He was not faceless. He was me. My breath caught. The figure wore my cassock, my crucifix, even bore the small scar above my eyebrow, the mark from when I first arrived and struck my head on the gate. His eyes, though, they were not human. They shimmered gold, reflecting candlelight that wasn't there. He stopped before the altar, turned to me, and spoke in my voice, but older, slower, cracked with centuries of wear. The procession never ends, Father Ward. Only the priests change. The others knelt, their heads bowing in unison, whispering a hymn I didn't recognize. It sounded like Latin, but wrong, half reversed, half in tongues that scraped against meaning. I shouted, "Who are you?" The doppelganger smiled faintly. "We are the prayers that were never answered." The church began to quake. Dust rained from the rafters. The candles bled wax that hissed when it touched the stone floor. I stumbled backward as the priests rose again and turned to leave, filing back into the mist, vanishing one by one. All except him, my mirror self. He stepped closer, until our breaths mingled. "Every shepherd joins the flock eventually," he whispered. "Every priest must walk the path he blesses." He placed his hand on my shoulder. The touch was ice. Then he leaned close to my ear. "When you hear the bells again, follow us." And just like that, he turned and walked into the fog, fading into nothing. When silence returned, I realized something terrible. Every footprint they'd left on the stone floor was filled with water. I touched one, and it rippled. Beneath the surface, faintly visible, was the reflection of a procession still marching, beneath the church. And as I backed away, I heard the first bell toll again. Slow, patient, calling me to join them. Episode 10, The Letter of the Excommunicated. Faith can survive many things: doubt, despair, even silence. But it cannot survive a truth written in your own hand. The morning after the endless procession, I found an envelope on the altar. It was sealed with crimson wax, stamped with a sigil I'd seen before, the same mark burned into my palm by the faceless monk. The paper looked centuries old, the edges crumbling, yet the ink glistened as though it had been written that very night. Across the front, in delicate script, was my name, Father Elias Ward. I hesitated, then broke the seal. The letter inside was written in Latin, but I understood every word as though the meaning had been carved directly into my skull. It began simply. "To whoever tends the church that moves, know that I was once as you are." The writer identified himself as Bishop Alaric de Montfort, the same heretic whose name had haunted every whisper since my arrival. His words were calm, deliberate, almost compassionate. "I sought to anchor heaven to this earth. I built St. Harrows upon the bones of the unshriven, believing holiness could redeem them. But the ground was stronger than my prayers." He described how the first graves began to shift within weeks of the church's consecration. The dead, unrepentant and restless, turned in their coffins until their tombs cracked. The villagers begged him to leave. Instead, he performed a forbidden rite, one that would bind the wandering souls to the soil until God remembered them. "Heaven did not remember," he wrote. "And hell did not forget." The letter ended with a plea, written in trembling strokes. "If this reaches you, then the earth still moves. You must finish what I began. Sanctify the ground with blood your own, or another's. Only sacrifice can still the soil. My hands shook. The wax on the envelope had begun to melt, dripping across the altar like tears of red glass. The letters themselves seemed to breathe, the ink pulsing faintly in rhythm with my heart. Then, from behind the altar, I heard paper rustling. The walls of the sacristy had split open, revealing a hidden drawer. Inside lay dozens of letters, each identical, each addressed to different priests, stretching back generations. Every one of them bore the same warning, the same curse. And on the last, the newest, the handwriting matched mine. I hadn't written it, but the ink was still wet. A sudden draft swept through the church, snuffing out every candle except the one beside the altar. The flame bent backward, burning blue. The letters began to flutter, their pages tearing themselves free, circling me like a storm of parchment wings. From the ringing silence came a voice not spoken, but etched directly into my mind. Every keeper of this church becomes the author of its sin. The letters burst into flame. I fell to my knees as ashes spiraled upward, forming the outline of a man the shape of Bishop Alaric, his eyes glowing like embers. He reached toward me, and for a heartbeat, I felt his hand pass through my chest, warm and heavy as blood. When I looked down, the sigil on my palm had vanished. In its place were words burned into the skin, the same phrase from the letter's final line. "Finish what I began." And somewhere beneath the church, the earth began to move again slowly, patiently, waiting for me to obey. Episode 11, The Bones Beneath the Altar. Voiceover storytelling style, 560 words. I used to believe altars were built for prayer. Now I know they are built to hide things. After Bishop Alaric's letter burned to ash, I felt the ground beneath the church shift again, slow, deliberate, as though something below were turning over in its sleep. Every board groaned in protest, and the stone tiles around the altar cracked in thin, perfect lines. It was as if the church wanted me to look. I moved the crucifix aside and pried up the first slab of stone. Beneath it, the scent hit me, rot and dust, mingled with incense older than sin. I tore away the next slab, and the next, until the opening yawned like a wound in the center of the sanctuary. My lantern trembled in my hand as I leaned down. What I saw was not earth. It was bone. Hundreds of them, stacked like the pages of a book, ribs, femurs, skulls, all arranged in the shape of a cross. Some still bore traces of robes, fragments of rosaries, rings on skeletal fingers. Priests. Monks. Servants of God. My breath turned shallow. I whispered the words of the requiem, but the bones answered first. A whisper rose from below, soft at first, then building, many voices speaking as one. "You read our names, but who will read yours?" I stumbled back, clutching my chest. The skulls shifted, their hollow eyes glinting faintly in the lantern light. One of them rolled toward me, stopped at my feet, and from its open mouth fell a fragment of parchment. I lifted it with shaking hands. The writing was familiar. My handwriting. "Sanctify the ground with blood, your own, or another's." The same words from the bishop's letter. But below, in a different ink, someone had added, "He chose another." I turned the lantern toward the pit again and saw that the bones were not dead. Beneath the pile, something pulsed, faintly glowing red. The air around it vibrated with a low hum, like a heartbeat inside the stone. Then, as if guided by that pulse, the skulls began to rise. Slowly, delicately, they lifted from the pile, forming a circle in the air. One by one, their jaws opened, exhaling dust and prayers in forgotten tongues. I dropped to my knees, tears burning my eyes. "Lord," I whispered, "what is this place?" A single voice answered, deep and sorrowful, from the pit itself. "It is where faith was buried alive." The circle of skulls collapsed, crashing back into the void. The hum stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. I reached into the hole, desperate for proof this was real, and my fingers brushed something smooth. A bone. A small one. A child's. Etched into it, carved so deep the marrow showed, were the words. Abel Ward. My father's name. I dropped it, horrified, but the bone clung to my hand, as though magnetized to my skin. The glow returned, now beneath my palm, spreading through my veins like fire. I fell against the altar, gasping. The floor trembled, dust raining from the rafters. From below came a final whisper, soft but unmistakable. The ground remembers its maker. And then the stone beneath my feet breathed. Episode 12, The Choir of the Unshriven. Sleep has become an enemy. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them, their voices weaving through the cracks of the church like wind through a tomb. They do not sing hymns of worship. They sing forgiveness they were never granted. It began 3 nights after I uncovered the bones. I had sealed the pit beneath the altar, praying it would silence whatever I had awakened. But silence, in St. Harrow's Hollow, is just another shape of sound. At first it came faintly, a single voice humming from somewhere in the nave. Low, gentle, mournful. Then others joined it, one by one, rising from the floorboards, from the walls, from the earth beneath the pews. A choir, unseen but near enough that I could feel their breath against my skin. Their melody was hauntingly beautiful, the kind that makes you want to weep without knowing why. I should have run. Instead, I listened. The words were in Latin, yet older somehow, the syllables dragging like chains. I caught fragments that translated roughly to, "Let not the unshriven walk unseen." The air shimmered. The candles burned blue. And in that pale light, I saw them. Dozens of spectral figures filled the pews, men, women, even children, each with mouth stitched shut by shadow. Yet the music still poured from them, notes vibrating through their hollow chests. Their faces flickered between flesh and bone, like the veil between life and death had worn too thin. At the center aisle stood one figure taller than the rest, cloaked in vestments that glowed faintly gold. He held no hymnal, yet his hands moved as though conducting the unseen. I stepped closer, heart pounding. "Who are you?" I whispered. He turned toward me, and I recognized the ruined face instantly. Bishop Alaric. "We sing for those who cannot confess," he said, though his lips never moved. "And you, Father Ward, are our final verse." The choir swelled. The walls vibrated. Candles burst in a rain of wax and flame. Their voices wrapped around me, each note sharp enough to cut. My rosary snapped in my hand. I shouted the Lord's Prayer, but the words twisted as they left my mouth, echoing back reversed, corrupted. The bishop raised his hand, silencing the choir in an instant. "You opened what I buried," he said. "The church moves because it breathes through us. Each song is a heartbeat. Each grave, a lung." He pointed to the stained glass window above the altar, the one depicting the Ascension. Cracks spread across it, forming the outline of a cross. Behind the glass, faint silhouettes pressed outward, dozens of hands reaching, clawing to be seen. The bishop's voice dropped to a whisper. "The unshriven wish only to be heard. You can give them." Episode 13, The Saint Who Refused Heaven. No one ever told me that sainthood could rot. But in St. Harrow's Hollow, even holiness decays. After the night of the unshriven choir, I woke to find the air heavy with the scent of myrrh and smoke. The candles I'd extinguished now burned on their own, their flames flickering backward downward like gravity had changed its mind. That was when I saw her. A woman stood near the altar, shrouded in light that wasn't light at all, pale and cold, like the glow of moonlight on bones. Her robes were torn, streaked with dirt, yet her face was serene, almost beautiful. A golden halo hovered above her head, cracked and rusted. "Who are you?" I whispered. She smiled with sorrow rather than kindness. "Once," she said, "they called me Saint Lucilla of the Bloodless Mercy. Now I am the breath beneath your church. I had read of her, a martyr who refused to renounce her faith as her village burned. The church canonized her centuries ago. But her relics had vanished, no shrine, no tomb, no trace. Until now. Why are you here? I asked. She tilted her head, and the halo wavered like a dying sun. Because heaven shut its gates. Because I forgave what heaven would not. Her voice trembled like bells underwater. They buried me under this altar, thinking my sanctity would bind the restless. But grace turned to poison. Every prayer uttered here feeds the ground, not the sky. I stared at her hands, they were clasped in prayer, yet blood seeped through her fingers, bright as rubies. The churchyard moves, she said, because it seeks holy ground. It drags itself across the earth, searching for where heaven still listens. But every step carries its curse. The walls moaned. Dust cascaded from the ceiling like gray snow. I realized the church was shifting again, the floor sliding beneath me with the sound of stone scraping bone. Saint Lucilla, I gasped, tell me how to stop it? Her eyes turned milky, distant. There is no stopping a pilgrimage of the damned. You can only lead it? She raised her hand, pointing toward the crack-stained glass window. Behind it, I saw silhouettes moving, hundreds of them, trudging through the fog beyond the village. Graves that had once filled the yard were empty now. The dead were walking. I ran to the door. Outside, the ground had torn itself open in furrows, dragging tombstones through the mud like anchors. The church's foundation groaned as if pulled by unseen chains. And above it all, Lucilla's voice echoed, part prayer, part lament. We march for the mercy denied. I turned back toward her, but the light that formed her shape was breaking apart, scattering like dust in sunlight. Her halo fell, striking the altar with a sound like shattering glass. When I lifted it, the gold had corroded to ash, leaving behind a single inscription burned into the stone. Heaven refused me. Earth remembers. The church fell still. Only one candle remained burning, its flame trembling in rhythm with my heartbeat. And then, faint but unmistakable, the bell rang once. In its echo, I heard her voice whisper from everywhere at once. Lead us home, Elias. If heaven will not open, find us another sky. The ground shuddered beneath my feet. And I knew the church was preparing to move again. Episode 14, The Daylight Funeral. It was the first time the churchyard moved in daylight. Until then, it had always waited for the dark, its whispering graves and wandering dead cloaked by the mercy of night. But that morning, under a sun the color of rust, St. Harrow's Hollow finally decided it no longer needed to hide. I woke to the sound of weeping bells. Not ringing, but weeping, their tones warped, echoing through the valley like the sobs of metal mourning itself. The entire church trembled around me. Dust poured from the rafters. The crucifix above the altar had split clean in two. I stumbled outside, expecting fog. Instead, blinding light poured over the fields, yet it felt wrong, too white, too sharp, as if it came not from the sun but from something behind it. The villagers were already gathered along the hill, their faces gray with fear. They were watching the churchyard. The graves were rising. Soil lifted in breathing waves, spilling bones and caskets into the open air. The earth beneath the church cracked, stretching outward in jagged veins of red clay. It was as though the ground itself was pushing the dead toward the light, forcing them into resurrection. A child screamed. Someone shouted prayers. And then, from the trembling altar inside, a voice called my name. Father Ward, the funeral is ready. I turned. Standing in the doorway was the faceless monk, his robes billowing in the heat. But this time, his flesh was forming a face slowly blooming from the blankness, sculpted by unseen hands. It was taking my shape. He gestured toward the open yard. You must preside, as all shepherds do. I could hardly breathe. What are we burying? He smiled without lips. What rises must also fall. The church will bury itself. Behind him, Saint Lucilla's cracked halo floated above the altar, spinning faster and faster until it became a ring of fire. The walls moaned, bricks splitting like ribs. And beneath the sound of collapse came another chant. Hundreds of voices, chanting my name in rhythm with the tolling bells. Elias Ward. Elias Ward. Elias Ward. The graves turned toward me. Not figuratively, they turned. The headstones pivoted as if pulled by invisible strings, aligning perfectly to face where I stood. The sunlight grew redder, the ground hotter. The air smelled of iron and incense. Then came the procession. The dead emerged from the earth in silence, some still wrapped in burial cloth, others little more than shadows of bone. They moved toward the church in a solemn march, carrying nothing but handfuls of dirt. I fell to my knees as they passed, unable to look away. They entered the sanctuary, one by one, and laid the dirt upon the altar. Each handful made the building sink lower, its foundation creaking, swallowing itself inch by inch. When the last figure approached, I recognized her, the widow, Margaret Holloway, veil still clinging to her face. She looked at me with eyes as empty as graves and whispered, "Every church must rest where it began." She stepped inside. The doors closed behind her. The bells tolled once more and the entire structure collapsed, folding inward, swallowed whole by the trembling soil. When the dust settled, only a single stone remained where the church had stood. It bore no name, no cross, only an inscription carved deep into its face. "Here lies the house of God, and the man who tried to keep it standing." My knees gave way. The villagers fled. And in the silence that followed, the ground exhaled slow, relieved, almost peaceful. Until I saw the shadow stretch toward me. The shape of a doorway, etched in sunlight, leading down into the earth. The church hadn't died. It had only moved again. Episode 15, The Churchyard That Moved. There is a silence that doesn't comfort, it listens. That was the silence I woke to. The church was gone, swallowed by the earth. The villagers had fled. Only the wind remained, whispering through the hollow where God's house had once stood. Yet beneath that quiet, I felt it a pulse, deep and steady, like the heartbeat of something vast beneath the soil. The shadow that stretched before me, the shape of a doorway, still waited. Every part of me screamed to run, but faith, or perhaps obsession, pulled me forward. The ground gave way beneath my feet, and I descended into the dark. It was not a cave. It was a corridor, carved of stone that breathed. My lantern flickered against walls lined with roots and bones, all curved inward like ribs protecting some enormous heart. The deeper I went, the louder the sound became, the low, rhythmic thrum of 1,000 souls praying in unison. Then I saw it. The church whole again, standing upside down beneath the earth. Its spire hung downward like the fang of a beast, its windows glowing faintly with red light. The graves surrounded it, suspended in the air, floating as if gravity had reversed its faith. I crossed the threshold, my steps echoing across the ceiling floor. The pews were filled not with bodies, but with shadows, human-shaped silhouettes that pulsed faintly with the same rhythm as the earth's heartbeat. They bowed their heads as I passed. At the altar stood Saint Lucilla. Her halo burned brighter now, the light almost blinding, her once gentle eyes now filled with sorrow and resolve. "You have come at last, Father Ward," she said. "The church has found its resting place. It cannot climb to heaven, so it burrows toward the next best thing, remembrance." Behind her, the faceless monk appeared, his form flickering between man and mirror. "It moves," he intoned, "because sin has weight. And faith must carry it." I realized then what they wanted. The church wasn't searching for holy ground. It was dragging itself toward me, the last priest, the final confessor. Every shift, every tremor, it had been following my steps, binding its fate to mine. Lucilla extended her bleeding hands. Ended.
Epilogue, the final confession. They will tell stories of St. Harrow's Hollow, of the church that walked, of graves that breathed, of bells that mourned. But they will never tell of me. It has been 3 days since the ground swallowed the church. I am writing by the last of my candlelight, the wax pooling like time itself, melting, dying, beautiful. The earth is quiet now, though it hums faintly when I pray. It no longer feels cursed. It feels full. I sometimes wonder if this field beneath me is heaven's rejection or its mercy. The sky above me is clear for the first time since I arrived, yet when I look long enough, I see shapes in the clouds' faces, faint and flickering, watching. Waiting. Perhaps the church did not move after all. Perhaps I did. Last night, in my dreams, or maybe beyond them, I saw Saint Lucilla once more. She stood barefoot upon the soil, her halo whole again, the wounds on her hands finally closed. Her voice was softer than before, the tone of forgiveness itself. The church was never meant to reach heaven, she said. It was meant to show what happens when heaven looks away. She turned her gaze toward me, and behind her I saw the procession, the widow, the monk, the bishop, even the child who drew the maps. All of them walking, but not in sorrow. They moved like pilgrims toward light. Toward rest. When I awoke, I found my cassock torn and my palms bleeding, not from injury, but from something emerging. Beneath the skin, faint and glowing, the sigil of Bishop Alaric pulsed one last time before fading into ash. It is strange what remains after revelation. Not faith. Not certainty. Only the echo of both. The soil around me is still warm, as if breathing. I can feel it moving beneath my fingers, gentle, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a thing reborn. Maybe that is what this was always meant to be, not damnation, but rebirth. The earth reclaiming what heaven abandoned. I have written everything I remember. The letters of the excommunicated, the choir, the saint who refused paradise, all of it. I do not know if anyone will ever find these pages, but if you do, know this. The church does not haunt this land. It is this land. Every prayer whispered within it fed its roots, every sin became mortar, every doubt a hymn of stone. And though it moves, though it hungers, it does not devour. It remembers. If someday you hear a bell toll in the distance when no church stands and no priest calls, do not be afraid. It is only St. Harrow's Hollow, shifting once more, seeking the faithful who forgot to confess. And if you see a steeple rise where none was before, step closer. You may hear my voice within the wind, finishing a prayer I began long ago. Requiem aeternam dona eis, Domini. Et lux perpetua luceat eis. Grant them eternal rest, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. I can hear the bell now. One final toll. The soil trembles beneath me, patient, familiar. The church has found me again. And this time, I will not run.